Welcome to Cloud Dialogues. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cloud Dialogues. We are on episode. Oh, and George has got a coffee, keeping her alert. Hopefully, it's decaffeinated. It's a bit late for her and early for us, which is a little bit of a change. We were on episode 2 of our International Women's Day specials, episode 2 of 3. And today we're talking about building inclusive cloud cultures, how to attract, retain, and empower more women in cloud, which is a very pertinent topic. So we're lucky to have Natalie Badawy with
Hi.
us from Circuit Recruitment.
Hey guys, thanks so much for
Um,
having me.
no worries. Thank you for joining us. And she'll give
Thank
us a
you.
few insights
We're very
on this
excited.
topic. Yeah.
As am
Do you want to
I.
just do a little quick intro and then we'll get into the news?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on today's show. I was pretty excited to hear that you guys were doing some International Women's Day episodes. It's a really pertinent topic that obviously we want to be having commentary around all year round, but it's important to shed light on these particular topics during these times where it's a little bit more relevant. Well, my name's Natalie. For anybody who doesn't know me, I am a senior recruitment consultant slash section manager at Circuit Recruitment. I specialize in software recruitment. I have a science background, which I think is a little bit unique and a bit different about me to what other recruiters might cut. I worked as a neurophysiology scientist for a couple of years before I moved into tech recruitment. Since getting into tech recruitment, I just haven't looked back. It's been an incredible 4 years with Circuit that I've had specializing in software recruitment there. But I think something that makes me a little bit different again is actually my involvement in the community, which is how I developed my passion for women's issues in the tech space. I do a lot of stuff outside of just work. I run and organise a meetup in the talent space called the Melbourne Talent Meetup, which is sort of the first of its kind. Now there's one in Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, in Geelong as well, with great organisers popping up in that community and space. We talk about amazing topics in the talent space there. But something that's a little bit more relevant to what I'm going to talk about today is that I volunteer for a great organisation called Her Tech Circle, which is a DE&I organisation slash initiative specialising in helping women and empowering them in their careers. So hearing lots of amazing women's stories and getting a feel for what's going on in that space has provided me with a lot of insights and a lot of passion and motivation to do and talk about these sorts of topics to people. It's just a really, really important thing. I also do have a podcast as well called What the Heck is Tech, which is really cool, which is a little bit different, a little bit more about introducing people to the tech space because we just think that there's the skill shortage comes from a lack of awareness rather than a lack of wanting to be part of the tech space. There's a big misconception out there that they're all software engineers when you guys would know it's so much more vast than that. So, yeah, it's a little bit of an intro to a couple of things I do.
Awesome. Thanks, Natalie. That's a lot to dig into there. Let's firstly go into the news. Georgia, you've been browsing the interwebs
I have
and,
been.
and found a few interesting items.
I've been
Seems to be a
keeping up
busy
with
time of year.
what's going on in the world in tech. Okay, what's up first?
Hyperscale
Uh, well,
announcements.
obviously, Mobile World Conference happened last week, so there was a few bits happening there in terms of cloud and hyperscaler type announcements. One, Microsoft announced a telecom specific software, like a data model, like a fabric. So, with the goal being obviously to help organizations to kind of unify all their data. So that was an interesting one. I think it'll be interesting to see how obviously telco, just like banking, I guess, is a challenging one in terms of cloud because of all those legacy systems that
Hmm.
are in use to run the 3G, 4G, 5G networks, um, as well as I guess like fixed line type telephony and internet would be in a similar situation, I would imagine. But it'll be interesting to see how that kind of helps and whether it can shift the dial on motivating telcos to kind of look at maybe moving more of their landscape onto cloud. I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, and they're in lots of different locations as well. Obviously, cloud has limited reach in that regard.
Yes.
Telcos have that extra challenge, which probably the AWS solution, which is the next item on the list, can probably help with around outpost racks being able to be deployed sort of anywhere and then connect back to cloud. So
Yeah.
for those that aren't aware, outpost racks are basically AWS in a box that you can ship to your data center, to your location, to your edge, and allows you to sort of have many of the features of cloud locally, which means that you can replicate data, do things quickly, have the agility, and also be able to connect back to AWS Cloud as well for the few back-end processing. So those outpost tracks can be used for the cloud sort of radio, providing a radio access network, which I'm not exactly entirely clear, but I think it's a way to be able to connect them to their actual networks
5G, yeah,
themselves. Yeah.
yes, that's my understanding. And what I had wondered about this one is obviously there's the use case of in terms of like low latency connection to the cloud for where you require that connection to your data center, where your mainframe is still in your data center. I was wondering if, and it was unclear in the AWS announcement because it's sort of the language was kind of like, oh, we've got this new thing and it's for businesses that need ultra low latency or like very low latency, and one of those is telecom. And I was thinking, is this going to be a bit of a potentially a bit of a game changer for financial services as an example as well, where they need that low latency connectivity? I don't know. I feel like it seems
Maybe.
like that's unclear.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, outposts have been around for a while, so
But
maybe the
I think
Microsoft one. Yeah.
yeah, I mean I think that the thing is that it's supposed to be like low latency,
Oh,
high
even lower.
throughput,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
So yeah, I'd be interested to hear from anybody that's kind of having discussions with them about using it for other use cases. Obviously, telecom is one of those, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of there's lots of other businesses that require low latency, high throughput workload connectivity. Just thought that was an interesting one. I started digging into it and didn't really get very far.
Sometimes the press releases are a bit high level. I like to see proper use cases in a bit more technical detail, but I guess that'll come out.
Yeah, interesting. Another one, so Vodafone and IBM made an announcement about quantum safe cryptography for phones.
Interesting.
So they basically showed off a prototype to protect mobile users better in a more quantum enabled world using IBM's quantum safe technology. Quantum is kind of coming up a little bit at the moment, but I do feel like, and I'm keen to hear your perspective on this as well, Matt, in terms of when I'm talking to executives now, I think we probably need to start, and obviously some of the governments have produced some guidance on this, right? Is we probably need to start looking at what are the known security or potential impacts to security of, I guess, the quantum dial kind of shifting, and where do we put that in the roadmap of works in terms of things to rectify in our estates?
It is a little bit to think about around the Australian government putting guidance around certain algorithms not being able to be used after 2030. That's what, 5 years away. Although that 5 years is probably going to come up pretty quick. Definitely in the next couple of years, everyone should sort of be aware of that, especially with AWS and Microsoft and Google doing all their own sort of quantum chips. Understand definitely the threats to their own environment, especially banking and stuff. Being aware of the technology around you is important as being part of an organisation. It definitely needs to be on the peripheral, but it's definitely going to come up in focus in the next few years.
Is something to start thinking about. And then the other one was, and similar theme to Microsoft announcement, was SAP debuted their business data cloud in collaboration with Databricks. The idea is they can unify SAP and third party data in order to help support a reliable AI kind of foundation in organizations. So, another lever to try and support organizations to sort out their data.
I'm surprised they didn't have this already, but it's normally Databricks. It's normally the data companies integrating with all these other systems. But this time it
That's
looks
the
like,
challenge, right?
yeah. But and SAP is where everyone's data is, right? For enterprise. So many large organizations will use it. So it makes total sense. Make
I
it
saw
easier to
this
unify those data sources.
I saw this cartoon on LinkedIn today, and it was like basically all these executives in a room being like, why isn't our data working for us? And then everyone was just like, oh, we should do more AI. And then someone was like, maybe we should just fix our data. And they threw that person out the window. And I was like, yeah, I think that's quite accurate, I would say. Data governance is the hardest thing of all of it, right? Like you can have all the
Yeah.
technical tools, but if you don't know where your data is, then fundamentally it's going to be quite difficult.
Yeah, or who owns it, or how sensitive it is, all those sort of, I mean, basics really.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Another thing that happened over the course of the week, Apple basically have announced that they're delaying some of the AI enhancements to Siri.
Yeah.
So that was due in the next 3 months. So quite a significant delay there. That was really around its ability to work with other applications. So
Mm.
that's a little bit disappointing. It does seem like they're a bit far behind.
Yeah, they're playing catch up a little bit. And their initial release of the latest OS had a summarization feature which didn't really work very well. It was
Oh yeah,
summarizing
that was
things
terrible,
incorrectly.
wasn't it? Did they roll that back?
Yeah, I think they did,
They
but
did.
they
Did
might
they
have
roll it
fixed it.
back?
They
Okay.
did initially, but it might have been re-released now. But I mean, that's just an example of them learning, learning in production, like we all do.
I like that. It makes it sound nice.
Maybe they're trying to work out proper use cases or whatever. I mean, they felt like
Mm,
they probably felt pressured. We have to put AI in everything, which is interesting because I haven't really heard Google talk about that from an Android perspective that much. That's not to say it's not happening. People just want their phones to work and be useful. So if they can
yeah,
find
I
some
mean,
features
like,
that,
but surely there would be some scope to just pay OpenAI for what they have. I guess they want to do it on their own for whatever reason.
they'll be using all the large sort of model providers at the back end, and maybe they're trying to work
Mm,
out their resiliency between them because you can't really rely on one either. So you've got to make what you're building work with multiple.
true, true. Another item, Twitter had a fairly significant outage on Monday. So this was filtering through while I was at work yesterday. Basically, Elon Musk was saying that it was Ukraine. Then, of course, a pro Palestinian operation, Dark Storm team claimed responsibility for the attack, as reported by a couple of news outlets. General consensus is that it's quite believable that they are responsible. Basically, X or I don't know if it was Musk himself said that they're putting some additional DDoS protection in place from Cloudflare.
I'm sure that I'm surprised they didn't have that already,
Well, that's what. Hmm, maybe
but
it's like
that's then
DDoS
they
prevention at
need to
another
have a
layer. Like,
they need to have a an incident to bump up their security. That's kind of how it works.
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of update on that. It's kind of rolled through today. In other news, we spoke quite a bit about DeepSeek a couple of weeks ago. Foxconn has unveiled Foxbrain.
That's my
Yeah,
favourite name so far,
it's
Foxbrain.
kind of cute, isn't it? Taiwan's first traditional Chinese LLM is what I'm
Yeah,
told. Built on Meta's Llama 3.1 architecture and NVIDIA's GPUs with open source intentions, apparently. Another kind of significant development out of a non US business. It does seem like they've focused in a more niche kind of market because I
mm,
have heard it's specializing around manufacturing and supply chain management.
yeah.
And I wonder if they've kind of, again, used distillation to train models using, your Geminis and your OpenAIs. I find that kind of interesting, the way that it's worded by the news outlets.
Yeah, that makes sense because that's manufacturing is their thing. So there'll be a lot of these
And
sort of niche models that have varying
yeah, that
purposes.
are being trained by the larger models that have been around for a while. So it'll be interesting to see what that, what the uptake of that is like, whether the hyperscalers will provide it as a managed service. And then the only other item that I had on the news this week was that apparently Microsoft is testing out LLMs to replace OpenAI on Copilot. So again, we just spoke a few minutes ago about dependence on models. It seems like that Microsoft obviously has some concerns about their dependence on OpenAI and are looking for alternatives. I think as well as looking for alternatives, they're also testing their own models. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I actually wasn't aware that Copilot was backed by OpenAI.
It doesn't surprise me since they've invested so much money in it. But having
Yeah,
their largest revenue, well, probably their second, one of their largest revenue drivers, like Office, relying on something that's out of their control is interesting. So that's probably part of where it's coming from as well.
anything else on the news?
Oh, there was one more, which was DeepSeek is now a managed service on AWS as of yesterday.
Ah, of course.
Yes.
Yes. I
Yeah.
guess they were quite quick to, I mean, I guess because of the all the hoo-ha, they were
Yeah,
quite quick
exactly.
to pick it up. So I'm assuming that it's not on it's not Azure yet, just
No,
AWS.
no, no, just AWS on Bedrock. So,
Okay.
which makes a lot of sense because people were
On
banned from
Bedrock.
using the DeepSeek managed one because they probably can't necessarily trust the data. But if it's on Bedrock, then you still have control over all your data and doesn't send the stuff back to China,
Right.
allegedly.
Okay. Okay. Allegedly. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I think that's done with the news. I think we can move into our second second episode of our IWD series. We're super excited to have Natalie with us to talk about building inclusive cloud cultures. Natalie, tell us, what drew you to tech?
I know from neuropsychology.
Yeah,
No,
Bit of a
neurophysiology.
jump.
Sorry, it's not neuropsychology. Theology.
I'm a little bit less qualified than a neuropsychologist. Oh gosh. I think what surprises people is actually I got into that job after doing a Bachelor of Science. I didn't have to do any extra study. So that was what was so great about it. It was such a good balance for what I wanted at the time. Funnily enough, though, I always say I wasn't necessarily drawn to tech. I didn't really know it existed on the scale that it does before I fell into it. And there's a bit of a joke across the recruitment landscape that we fell into recruitment. Nobody really wakes up in the Australian market these days and
That's
goes, I
true.
want to be a recruiter one day. You end up in it if you kind of don't really know what you want to do. Or if someone turns around to you one day and goes, oh, you should try recruitment. So we all say we fell into it. A lot of us have what we call past lives in a different area. So I call like neurophysiology was my past life, something I did before I was in recruitment. But I can tell you why I love being in tech because I mean I fell into it by accident, but I want to stick around. I have no intention of ever moving. I just tell people that I went from human sciences to computer science. So like that curiosity of learning side of me and that science mind always, that part of my brain gets scratched from being in the tech market. And I just love how it's a vast and ever evolving area. I love that it touches absolutely everything. So if you have a particular interest, chances are technology touches it or affects it in some way. So if I wanted to specialize from my medical science background in a certain area, I could look a little bit more into med tech. If you're really interested in financials, you can look into fintech. If you're in the education space, ed tech. So it touches absolutely everything. That's why I think it's such a fantastic area to be in.
That's true. And a lot of recruiters have backgrounds in all different
They call
fields,
it,
right? It's a
yeah,
people job. A lot of the time, it's a
absolutely.
people job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's recruitment tech as well, because we need to use technology in our jobs too.
So you work in a lot of meetups and those sorts of things. So what about the HTC org?
Yeah,
What's it
yeah.
based?
Absolutely. HTC stands for Her Tech Circle. We used to be called Girls in Tech, so there might be a lot of people out there who might recognize us a little bit more as Girls in Tech.
Oh,
Yeah, we
yes.
had to undergo a bit of
Okay.
a rebrand last year. There's the penny dropping there. Unfortunately, Girls in Tech in the US last year, over the course of the market, took a bit of a crash. They lost a lot of sponsorships. It was headquartered in the US, and unfortunately, they stopped operations. But we had just started making a lot of amazing headway in the Australian chapters here. We didn't want to give up the work that we were doing. So I mean, I had
Mm.
nothing to do with the rebrand. I sort of was only like a small piece in that bigger puzzle. But the amazing co-founders of Her Tech Circle kind of got together and put their heads together. And within a couple of weeks, we completely rebranded. We had a whole new look. We had a whole new name. A mission was put together, and it's been an incredible journey. And they're only growing and growing. So it used to be Girls in Tech, but I volunteer manage their volunteer team there and just help make sure that the events that they have the right people. And I met a lot of amazing women in particular in the tech space through that, and just listening to their stories, hearing some of the panels, some of the topics that we choose are really relevant. It's just like one big giant support group to try and help empower women to to do what they've got to do to get past the barriers that we sometimes face that maybe look a little
Mm.
bit different to what other people go through in the tech market.
I had no idea about, so I'm assuming that this is related to the change in government in the US and that.
I think it actually has a little bit more to do with what happened in the market last year from a financial point of view. Um,
Right.
yeah, we
Okay.
took a bit of a dive. Obviously, COVID, the recruitment market completely shot up. We saw
Yeah.
lots of competition for talent. People were throwing money all over the place. Obviously, that's got to equalize itself at some point in time, and we really saw
Mm.
that quite
Mm.
hard. I think it hit the US even harder than it hit us here.
Yeah.
And they lost a
Yeah.
lot of their sponsorships. Unfortunately, a lot of their funding
Right.
just got cut. And that was the
Mm.
way they were able to operate things like the website, ongoing running costs. And they had no choice but to shut down. And because they owned all the IP, we had no choice if we wanted to continue as an organization here, even though we were a separate chapter to what was going on in the US, we were operating completely separately. We had to give up all of the Girls in Tech brand, all of that. That was really sad. But what was born of that was just it has been the most incredible Australian made and created owned community. And we're really
Mm.
proud of that.
What incredible leadership to have to deal with that and to still, and I think that's what I expect from leaders that I engage with is I don't care if there's no money, right? Like if there's no money, it's not a big deal. Like, there's no money for DEI because you're global CEO. I actually don't care, right? What I do care is that you will stand up and advocate for women. That is what I care
Definitely.
about.
And,
Mm.
And that is just
some of this stuff is
amazing
free.
advocacy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of the
yeah.
stuff is free. And I think, having the right mindset is completely free. And that's what I think something that maybe we'll touch
Mm,
on later is that people see a DE&I sometimes as a checkbox, it's a target. We have to hit this many women in the organization, blah, blah, blah. But that's completely the wrong mindset. That's actually the mindset that's going to cost you money. But if you have the mindset of this should be just a culture and a way of thinking amongst the teams, and we just sort of spread that through people in leadership have that mentality, that's how things organically move in that direction completely for free. So, yeah, that's what the irony is that if you have a checkbox, you're going to put things in place that will cost you a lot of money, or you'll have failed attempts, which will cost you a lot of money in the long run. And it's a bit more of a short-sighted way of thinking.
I think women, there is a lot of data that says that women are criticized more. And I think that this is this these sorts of dynamics affect the way that women work. So what I wanted to ask you was how do you see that playing out in terms of recruitment and in the workforce? I think that was good. I think that was perfect. Yeah.
I think what's interesting about the barriers that females face is that it forces them to be a lot more thorough, a lot more perfectionistic, because there's like certain barriers to entry that force
Mm,
them to be overlooked.
mm,
I always say, like, have the confidence of a white man to people when I'm trying to encourage
yeah.
them to do good things, is because a white man doesn't second guess themselves most of the time. The dynamics of society is not set up for them to have to second guess themselves, whereas for us,
Mm,
it breeds traits in us that create, maybe some elements of like what you would consider to be a more thorough engineer or somebody who's performing at a higher level. I think what's important to acknowledge is the fact that if you're coming across scenarios like that, there's a societal dynamic at play there that puts us in a scenario where we're either disadvantaged or advantaged. There is like an overcompensation culture that sort of does occur just based on the conversations I've had within women in her tech circle around this kind of stuff, is that when you feel overlooked, there is this tendency to put pressure on oneself rather than put pressure on this dynamic or the system that created that environment for you, which is why
Mm,
organizations like her tech circle is so important, because it's important to be able to enter into a space where you can talk about these things really freely in a safe space around other women who understand where you're coming from and who might be able to provide you with a little bit of empowerment, and so that you can maybe start having conversations internally around how you can change that for yourself. What's something I say about her tech circle, and I know this is a question you guys have for later on, but I can touch on it now around, why these organizations are so important. We're not sitting here trying to be single-handedly closing the gender pay gap or single-handedly changing jurisdiction around or policies that will help women in the workforce. We don't have that power, but what we can do is create spaces for women to enter into so that they can hear about the barriers that they might face as a woman in tech, understand them better, and learn how to jump over them and take leaps of
mm,
faith and ask for sponsorship and mentorship within their organization so that they feel empowered to take those leaps and advocate for themselves better, because we're not going to be able to solve these issues, maybe not even the next 10 or 50 years. There's a reason why these dynamics are in place, isn't because it's advantageous. When we're seeing this happen being mirrored in politics in the US, is that you could call it the oligarchy or whatever it is. It's advantageous for the rich to stay rich, and because they're in powerful positions, they'll do everything in their power to ensure that that stays that way. It's the exact same dynamics. I think that sometimes paints, I don't want it to be a negative conversation around like men in power are evil, because that's really not the case. A lot of the times it's unconscious.
mm.
If you put yourself in their position, if you're in a position of power and things are easy for you, why would you want that to change? Even if it's on a subconscious level, there's a lot of unlearning you have to do in order to acknowledge that this is the case, it has to change. It is why we sometimes see women in leadership become really territorial as well. It's like, I had to work for what I got, so I'm not going to make it easier for you to get what you need to get. So that's why these dynamics arise. It's really important to understand that they're there for a reason. It's just about having those conversations, bringing awareness to it, and just empowering people to connect with other empowered people, because empowered women empower women.
I think what you said there is really valid. And I think for a lot of the part, when it comes to men, I think sometimes they want to help, but they're not quite sure what to do.
Yeah,
And they feel like if they do something and it's received in the wrong way, of it's received in the way that they want it to be received in the right way. So I think they almost get into this fear. Well, I have heard some leaders say to the women that work for them, I really want to help, please receive my help in the way that it's intended. I think that's so humble.
it's
I so
so hard.
appreciate that perspective. It is hard.
It's
I
so hard.
acknowledge it because in a previous life, I did a lot of work with the trans community and I felt the same way, right? I was like, I really have no idea what the best, please tell me how to best help you, and like I'm everything that I'm doing, please tell me if I'm doing something wrong, like because I
Yeah.
don't, I'm completely out of my depth, right? I have no lived experience, and it's the same for them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's interesting. The reason why I gravitate towards women's issues is because it's the only minority group I'm a part of. So it's the only lived experience I can relate to. So, of course,
Mm,
I want to be vocal about other issues around neurodiversity and making sure that diversity of ethnic background is important and all of that sort of stuff, cultural diversity. But the reason why I gravitate towards speaking about women's issues is because I'm educated about it. I feel confident talking about it. I have lived experience in that space. So, and I'm a big believer in like you shouldn't engage in intense conversations around things you don't feel confident
mm,
talking about.
yeah.
I think if you're going to go ahead and talk about an experience, it really should come from a place of like, you should really know what you're talking about, but then it needs to be broached of like I'm open to then hearing about what Matt has to say, because he will have a different experience. His experience
Mm,
of DE&I will be completely different because he's coming maybe from a different place where the dynamics that are born of like us feeling that we're disadvantaged maybe creates this weird dynamic for men where they don't know how to approach those subjects with us. They maybe don't have the
Mm,
training to
yeah.
help us. They want to help, but they don't know how. Or sometimes they've got their blinkers on and
Mm,
they don't really see necessarily. Like I will never
mm,
forget my husband actually turned around and said, I was telling him about some of the stories people were talking about from her tech circle where they would go, I feel overlooked. I feel like nobody listens to my opinions. And he goes, I just don't believe that's the case. Like, how could that be the case? I would never treat a woman like that. And I'm like, just because you don't treat women like that,
Yeah.
it doesn't
yeah.
mean it's not happening. And funnily enough, 3 months later, he was given some extra direct reports that were particularly females who were taken from another manager that was receiving complaints about their management style. And the females that were underneath him were really enjoying his management style. So they took female direct reports, put them underneath him because he was doing really, really well with that and was being quite nurturing. And he goes, oh gosh, like I didn't realize that I had a colleague manager who was treating them that way. And that could be
Mm,
completely
mm,
like, maybe that male manager just didn't receive the right training to be able to manage females in a way that made them feel really empowered. So, and it's not that person's fault. And I think that we
mm,
sometimes have this tendency to like place blame. It's like, oh, um, he treated me that way. He treated me that way. Or I was treated this way by my team. And it's like, but sometimes they don't know what they don't know, and sometimes they don't even realize the like what they're doing wrong. So it's really
mm,
important for us to
mm,
be vocal. I know that it shouldn't be that way, that we have to rely on ourselves to advocate. It should just be a world that's set up for us. But unfortunately, we're ignoring the facts if we think that way. If we just sort of stamp our feet, have a tantrum, and go, this is unfair, we're ignoring the fact that this is the way the world is. This is the way the world works. This is the hand we've been dealt. We must deal with the hand we've been dealt, and therefore just empower ourselves to try and advocate for ourselves.
So you were talking about empowered women empowering women, and that's super important because when you were talking about white men or men probably in general have the confidence of a white man or whatever, and a lot of the time obviously that is because of the leadership is all male dominated, so they're not second guessed. And obviously I don't know what it's like to be female, but my guess is that in that environment the women are probably a little bit unsure.
Yeah.
Sometimes some second guess themselves because of that. And if you do have more women in that leadership area, then obviously that might balance itself out a little bit, is my
Totally.
guess.
Yeah, it
And
gets modeled.
that's
And
just the small point that I wanted to make.
absolutely, it gets if it's modeled higher up, then people. Unfortunately, what happens in certain organizations is that there's this established dynamic. That established dynamic brings out different behaviors in people. It's very, very nuanced conversations that we're having here. So obviously, it can be hard to articulate what that actually means. But if you've got an established dynamic in an organization where all of your leadership is male, then you can understand why it would be really hard to attract females to an organization like that, because that's the
Yes.
established dynamic. So there's a couple of like sayings that come up that I tell people when I'm trying to mentor them or empower them, and it's like, have the audacity of a white male leader, or apply like a white male would apply for that role. And some people might take that the wrong way, but really I say that in more a jest and in more of a joke. It's just to get
Yeah.
that point across of like, do you really think that a white male CEO would be second guessing themselves like the way that you are right now? If you want to be a female diverse CEO or a female person of color CEO, then you have to behave in a way where you are manifesting that for yourself. Unfortunately, you're going to come up against a lot more barriers. We can't understate that because of the way the system is set up. So you have to have even more audacity. You have to be even more ambitious. And sometimes you have to be even more aggressive because you won't have the road as easy. So it's really important, as much as I say it's just do it like that. It's not as easy as that because there's established dynamics that make the barriers a little bit harder to jump over for diverse women, and especially people who are vying for leadership positions.
Yeah. If women see other women in particular types of roles, it's more likely they're going to apply for those types of roles as well. Is that
Definitely.
sort of the way? Because I've interviewed lots of people, and obviously 90% of the people that I interview are all male,
Yeah.
and it really upsets me because being diverse is super important because it helps different lines of thought, different thinking, different opinions, um, important.
Yeah.
And it's so important to get those people to apply. So to get them to apply, they've got to see your interviewers need to be females, a lot of the time,
Yeah.
right? And
I always
and
think, I always think on that point, Matt, when you're interviewing someone, there should be at least someone in the course of their interview process that looks like them. When that doesn't happen, I do think there is a very real possibility that that impacted the candidate's ability to perform in an
Mm.
environment where they perhaps felt very out of place. And
Definitely.
that's whether it's women or, any diverse groups. Very passionate about making sure that there is at least one person throughout their process that looks like them. Like, I think that's what
Absolutely.
people want. Like, I think at the very least, that's what people want, right? Like
Absolutely.
I remember I had someone was venting some frustration about like women being frustrated. Like, I don't understand what these people want. I was like, literally, all the women want is to see somebody that has gone through, and I think in this instance, it was like the promotion process. It was about the promotion process, right? All they want is to see somebody that looks like them,
Mm.
that is a woman that has gone through this process. That's literally all they want, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
actually not that difficult.
But then there is a bit of a chicken or the egg situation there because you're trying to create a more diverse culture, but you're sort of starting from a place of there's only a couple of women in the organization or a couple of women in the tech
Yeah.
team, right? So then you have to start from
Yeah.
somewhere. Where I would start
Yes.
in that kind of scenario is, maybe just running some internal bias workshops or paying somebody to come in and have a chat to the people around how do we
Mm.
ensure that our interview process is inclusive, or how do we train our interviewers so that they make sure that women feel comfortable. We call these things like barriers to entry, and they are
Yeah.
created all throughout the process. It exists from people who are really junior who don't even know that tech is something that they could do. That's a barrier to entry. We don't talk about tech to women as much, which is why I've done the podcast What the Heck is Tech as well, so that we can try and like create a little bit of a buzz around tech and people know that tech jobs are the best jobs, so that hopefully more women get their eyes on that and they want to get into it, because that starts there of like a lack of awareness. If interviewers don't know how to interview people in a way that's inclusive, then you're weeding people out as well.
Mm.
So if you have people in your interview process who tend to be really cold and don't give away a lot on their face, then that makes females who have really high EQ really nervous, and it puts them off completely, and it might cause them to perform really badly in
Mm.
interviews. There's also a lot of data around what types of interviews are more inclusive than others. So really high pressure interview scenarios like coding challenges and pair programming tend to weed out females because we tend to prioritize thoroughness over speed. That can sometimes weed females out for unfair reasons as well.
Such an important example. That I feel is such an important example because
Absolutely.
I think it's definitely a systemic barrier. And I feel like a lot of the big companies are still doing these types of activities. And to me, it's just so unnecessary.
Definitely. And there's data out there, but it's like, how do we find that data? It's starting off with like conversations internally. If you don't want to do big data sets of research or search for that data, which I mean, like, why wouldn't you? Because you can probably just ask ChatGPT to do a deep research section for you and get some really interesting stuff out. But if you don't want to do that, then you can just start. Like, it's as easy as having some coffees internally with female people in your organization and asking them, what did you enjoy about the interview process? What didn't you enjoy about the interview process? What made you nervous? What could we have done to make you feel more comfortable? And then just having a couple of coffees there will give you plenty of really good ideas of how to implement new things into your interview process that will make it more inclusive. Then once you have a couple of great female engineers or great female leaders, then you can put them on your panels, and then it will get easier and easier over time. But sometimes getting over that initial hump is a little bit difficult. But once you've got that in place, the culture shifts organically, and it becomes easier and easier over time to hire females and keep them in your organization. Because like I said to you before about how sometimes just treating it like a checkbox or a target can cost more money in the long run. And that's because you might hire somebody who's a female just because you need to hit a target. But then if they're unhappy in their team because the dynamic is really skewed towards male mentality and there's not a lot of EQ in the team, or emotional intelligence in the team, then they might start to feel really isolated. They might not feel supported. They might not feel like they're going to get promotion opportunities. And then they're just going to leave first chance they get. They might only last 3 to 6 months. They might last under a year, which when you're training somebody up and you're taking that investment in them, to have to then hire somebody else, train them up from scratch after
Mm.
only a year of
The
getting pretty much no
cost.
value out of that
Yeah.
person. It's a big business cost. And these are hidden costs in the business. And this is what's hard It's the same reason why companies make all these redundancies and then hire them back, because they're thinking short term. On paper, we need to make all these redundancies because we need to up the share price, or we need to show that stakeholders are going to get their return on investment. But then in a year's time, oh shit, we've got all these projects in the pipeline. We need to hire them all back. And that's a massive business cost long term. And you can see that because
Mm.
recruitment costs, they have to come to agencies because they want to hire really quickly. They've got all these pressing projects. It ends up costing the business a lot long term. But they're just trying to save face in the moment. So it can be really hard because those are hidden costs in the action that they've taken short term. Same with diversity hiring. If you're hiring just to hit a quota, you'll create a lot of cost for yourself long term, because if they're not happy, you're going to get a lot of attrition. You're going to constantly be chasing that checkbox, constantly be chasing that 50-50 split when none of your dynamics underlying have changed, and you're just going to be spinning your wheels, chasing your tail, spending lots of money. Women can make a company really rich in so many ways that might not be seen, because if you hire females who are happy in the organization, they're going to stick around long term. They're going to give you their loyalty. Like Matt said, you're going to have a lot more diversity of thought in teams, which is going to create better products. You're going to touch on a lot more points that will help your customers. It's just so important in so many ways. And that will make a lot of money for the business. But what you can see when you crunch the numbers, that doesn't translate. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversations, in order to have conversations with C-suite CEOs, business owners, co-founders, you have to talk money. You have to talk about what makes business sense. That is such
Mm.
a missing piece in this whole entire dynamic, because I don't know how to talk to a CEO about their budgets. I don't know half about how business runs. I'm still quite early in my career, but there's certain nuances there that maybe I can't do yet because I don't know what it's like to be a business founder. I don't know how business dynamics work. I don't know about the million other costs they're taking into account. But what I can do is learn about how to put DE&I into monetary terms. So I can say, this is how much money you're saving by doing XYZ, or this is how much money you're going to be creating by doing XYZ. That's how you have to translate it when you're talking to higher ups and CEOs, because that's the language that will resonate the most with them, because they've got a business to run and they've got money to make. At the end of the day, we've got to call a spade a spade. That's what it's all about.
An interesting point. I feel like there might be a role there for me to play, as I'm supposed to be a C-suite advisor.
Potentially,
As
potentially.
is this podcast.
Hopefully everyone's listening. That's an interesting, I've never really thought of it like that, to be honest.
Yeah, you've got to speak the business's language. And I think this is what becomes so difficult. We can spin our wheels here, we could probably talk for another 3 hours about this topic, and still nothing will change. You will listen to a podcast, get really, really inspired, then go, well, where do I even start? Or you might have some of those conversations over, 6 or 12 months and go, why is nothing changing? Realistically, that's the missing piece. You can have these conversations, plant those seeds. And that's really what we want to do with today's episode. Start planting those seeds in people's heads so they can start having conversations internally, and maybe that will raise a bit of awareness and start some of those changes. But really,
Mm.
that link is like, how do I make sure this is important to the business? The only way to do that is to speak the business's language. Money makes the world go around. People, and this is the difference between tokenism and action. And this is why we get a
Mm.
lot of those International Women's Day breakfasts and marketing that gets put out there. It's really tokenistic. It's really just like, we care about women and we want to seem like we care about women. But realistically, when you look at
There's
their
so much of
Ouija,
it.
yeah, when you look at, like, obviously Ouija started posting the pay gaps for individual organizations about a year ago, actually. Some of those companies that are screaming for the rooftops diversity, you look at their pay gaps and you go, oh,
It's really bad.
awkward.
Yeah.
And the difference between what they're doing from a marketing perspective and the actual action that they're taking is that they want to attract people and attract females into their organization by doing all this fancy marketing, and that's great, but that's only half the issue. Taking action within the
Mm.
business costs money and time and energy and resources, and that's where the barrier is, because they'll go, oh, we can do the marketing because then it makes us seem like we're doing all this amazing stuff, but then actually what actions that they're taking internally, that costs a lot of time and energy and resource. And a lot of business leaders don't see the value in it from a monetary perspective or an outcomes perspective, business outcomes that don't have to do with money. So they won't invest the time and energy and effort into it. So that's really the hardest part of this whole conversation.
Yes, it all comes down to EBITDA, right?
Exactly.
That's all that matters in the end.
We can't change that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that.
Mm.
And we have to accept it. Otherwise, this is where people become disengaged. If you get really, really down in the weeds of it and you become super existential and you go, well, this is just so unfair and nothing's ever going to change, then you're really likely to just go, well, I'm just going to disengage then. If I can't change anything, I'm spinning my wheels. Why would I engage? So changing the mentality to acceptance, this is the hand that minority groups have been dealt. It's not necessarily about wanting to affect all this change within the next year. That's a really unrealistic goal. But a really realistic goal is to go, how do we raise awareness within the organization? How do we ensure that there's ongoing training and chats, and we create a culture where it's safe to have these chats over lunchtime, and so that people feel heard? How do we create a culture where somebody can put their hand up and go, hey, I reckon we should make this change to the process? Slowly, slowly, change will happen. But in the meantime, as women and minority groups, it's going, how do I put myself in the most advantageous position? How am I networking? How do I make sure I'm feeling empowered so that I'm networking with business leaders so that I'm the first cab off the ranks when they think, oh, about that promotion? So, we
Mm.
can't change the system yet. It will change hopefully gradually over time. But what we can do is really empower people in the organization to take opportunities to apply for those promotions, to advocate for themselves fiercely, but in a way that will get them to where they need to go. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. I think so many of us like shout from the rooftops, things need to change. And yes, they do. But if we go down that route, you're just going to become disengaged, because you're going to become very disappointed with the outcomes. Things change so slowly, they change so gradually. They do change, but it takes time, and you can't expect to wake up in a couple of months' time and the whole dynamic is completely different. But you need to remain engaged. And I think the only way to do that is think realistically, come to a place of acceptance, and come from a place of empowerment.
Everyone has control over various aspects of things.
Yeah.
If you take care of what you can control and do what you can,
Yeah. It's Stoicism
then it's
101.
going to happen.
I don't know if any of your audience is like familiar with that philosophy, but Stoicism is
I would think
about
so.
accepting, yeah, it's about accepting what you can't change and focusing on what you can change. And so I think if we all did that organically, change will happen, because
Mm.
it's just the way that that's the dynamic that's going to be born out of that mentality. It allows you to remain engaged in the conversation. I think so many people get so overwhelmed or really disheartened or really upset or very emotional about these sorts of things, and they are inherently upsetting and emotional topics because they hurt a lot of important people around us. But it's so important to remain engaged. The only way to do that is to protect your mental health, not get bogged down into the weeds of it,
Mm.
And I
and
think
just focus on what you
take a
can
deep
control.
breath
Yeah.
every now and then for all parties,
Touch
right? Like,
grass, girl. Touch grass.
I
Yeah.
it's not I remember in one I had one memorable engagement in my career that was focused on helping women that were escaping abuse. It was such a hard project on everybody from a
Yeah.
mental perspective.
I can
And like as
imagine.
important as it is, right? But I think every single person that was involved in that was massively impacted by it.
Mm.
We were very lucky to have supportive leadership that stepped in to make sure that everyone doing okay. Similarly, it's important for everybody to just, like you say, just
Take
decompress
care
a
of
little bit
yourself.
from it sometimes. Yeah, yeah. And try to communicate the need as well. Like we all have our moments. I had a moment this morning.
Don't we all?
So I just cracked it with someone and then was like just generally frustrated with life. Cool. I want to talk about flexibility because I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post yesterday. I spoke about I have endometriosis and it's
Mm.
Endometriosis Awareness Month. So I want to just like bring that up as a side to encourage people to go and do some research. And maybe that's a bit of a pathway into the flexibility discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I would argue that flexibility is probably like the most important and most critical point when it comes to inclusivity. And I'm not just talking about women. I'm also talking about when
Yeah.
it comes to hiring neurodiverse people, people with disabilities, people with different walks
Yeah.
of life. People have caretaking duties, not just for children, but also for old parents.
Mm,
Right? Anybody who takes on a caretaker role in their family dynamic needs flexibility in their workplace. It disproportionately affects women because we tend to, on average,
mm,
have more caretaking duties than men do, and take on more of those roles and that unpaid labor within our home dynamics. So many people ask me questions around what can we do? I think the most important thing when you're asking about what women want to see in their team and in their organizations, if you want to understand what they want, you have to understand why they want it. If you get to the
mm.
to the crux of why these things are in place, of why we're disadvantaged, of why we feel hard done by, of why some of your people in your organization might be feeling like they're not heard, then the solutions actually become really obvious. You don't even have to ask, what do we do? You can probably creatively
Mm,
come up with solutions. And really, the why in terms of flexibility is because we have really crazy lives. We take on a lot of unpaid labor that comes into female existence. And that's the why when it comes to flexibility. And it becomes really obvious. If you had a full-time job outside of work, which is taking care of kids and running a household, then how would you feel about having to go into the office every single day? It would be quite a hard thing to consolidate in your mind, right? So that it becomes very obvious from that perspective. Even when it comes to just little things, little policies that people can put in place. So I've heard of really
mm,
great organizations doing Fridays and no meeting days, or you are not allowed to schedule a meeting around school pickup and drop off hours. So between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., no meetings, because that's when people have to do their thing. They have to go and pick up and drop off their kids. They might have appointments for
mm,
those kids, and flexibility, not just around going into the office, but also around hours. So, is there a high enough trust culture in your teams where you can say, okay, I don't care when you work, whether any time between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., as long as the work gets done and as long as you're clocking your hours?
yeah.
Because some people might be able to work really, really hard in the morning and then their life becomes chaotic in the afternoon because they've got little children
Mm,
running around. But then once the kids go to bed, they can log on and they can do another couple of hours. Why do you care when the work is getting done? Once there is conversations and nuanced conversations going on internally around the why, what women want and why they want it, then the what you can do becomes really obvious. And that's how you sort of shift the culture when it comes from a place of curiosity and understanding. It's another reason why remaining unemotional about these things is really important because, like I said, conversations around this can become really heated. Once you sort of trigger people's anger points, they become a bit more they become disengaged with the facts, they become engaged with their
mm.
emotions. That's why it's really important to conduct these conversations really objectively. What are you looking for? What do you want? Why do you want it? What you should be asking women in your organizations through things like audits, entry interviews, exit interviews, one-to-ones all throughout that person's career within your organization.
Yeah, and I mean it's beneficial for men as well anyway. Obviously, a lot of organizations are asking their people to return to the office right now. I have a good friend that's him and his wife are having another baby, and I just
Totally.
think when they had their first child, it was all work from home was just a regular permanent thing. If men are supported to have flexibility as well, they're better able to support their,
Yep.
partners, sisters, mothers.
Having kids
Um,
affects males as well. Of course, it
absolutely.
disproportionately affects women because they do take on a brunt on average. And I obviously can't speak for every single relationship dynamic. On average, it does disproportionately affect women's careers and relationship dynamics. If you think that you're going to have a child and be sleeping through the night while you're completely unaffected as a male, you're affected just as much by those
Mm,
dynamics. So you're right, it does benefit males as well and allows them to be better partners or allows them to have better partnerships with the people around them or engage better in those dynamics. If you're less tired, then you're not rocking up to work really cranky. You're able to be more productive at work. You're able to have more engaging and meaningful conversations. You're able to service your clients better. You're able to work on better products, have more creative ideas. Of course, we're talking about benefiting women, but we're also talking about the benefit of men. We're talking about the benefit of literally every single individual person, no matter what race, color, gender, background you have. So yeah, it affects all of us positively. It is unfortunate, like with the return to work policies coming in. I'm going to bring up that thing that I mentioned before around like what makes business sense. To consolidate it in your own mind, you have to understand like why businesses might want this. A lot of them are spending a lot of money on expensive rent in the city, big fancy offices and all that sort of stuff. For them, they have
mm,
to justify those costs. It doesn't make it right, but it does allow you to sort of come from a place of objectivity when you understand the reasons why. I think so much of us just go, these CEOs don't trust us, blah, blah, blah. Once again, you're coming from a place of emotion. When you speak that way, you're angry, you're upset that you have to go back into the office. I get it. It's incredibly bloody frustrating.
mm,
It's pretty
yeah.
shitty and it sucks. You have every right to feel angry about it. But when you broach these conversations, broach them from a place of objectivity, you get absolutely nowhere when you talk about these things from that anger, that place place of emotional frustration and anger. Yes, have a vent to your friends at home, but when you're having these conversations internally and trying to create change and go, hey, this is why flexibility needs to be advocated for, needs to come from a place of objectivity, and it needs to come from a place of what makes business sense. Because right now, CEOs are like, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this incredible office. It's costing us a lot of money. So we need to get your asses in there, right? And so changing the conversation, think about the cost to the business by having lots of attrition because people will leave and look for more remote roles. That is a business cost. All of a sudden, you're turning it into the business's language. That's going to cost them a lot of money in recruitment fees. When you speak from that place of objectivity and fact, then you might find that you're making a bit of headway internally.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting to see how all of this has evolved and is evolving.
Workplace culture is changing, yeah,
So
a lot
quickly,
Mm,
more
so,
in the
so
last
quickly.
couple of years than the previous 10 to 20 years, I guess.
And unfortunately, we're not going to see a change in that velocity. It's only going to get faster because of all the
mm,
advancements with AI, how that's going to impact the workforce.
Yep, indeed. So, one of the topics that seems to come up, especially at this time of year, is the pay gap in tech. What is your definition of what the gender pay gap actually is?
I think it's actually really important not to subscribe to just one definition because then you kind of like put your blinkers on. I'll do my best to sort of summarize a couple of them or what I believe to be the main ones. The first thing, which I think is like the most common conception of what the gender pay gap would be, is that two people of different genders are getting paid differently for the same job, which definitely does exist. I would say it's a less systemic version of what we're dealing with when it comes to the gender pay gap. It's a little bit more, on a smaller level. It's microculture, micro-organizational sort of dynamic that gets created through things like not having things like pay transparency. If you have like expressed pay transparency of actual brackets that are okay, this is what a senior engineer, this is what a junior engineer gets paid, it stops you from having being able to have really open conversations internally, and that's how things like this get spread. So a female engineer might not know what she's worth in the market and might ask for less because she's historically just been paid less in these types of organizations. So that definitely exists, but there are definitely more systemic versions of what a pay gap could be. It's more of a situation where it's across different industries. So if you think about it like this, where you've got more male dominated industries such as constructions, professional services, financial insurance industries tend to be really high earning industries. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have more female dominated industries like teaching, arts and recreation, administrative support. They tend to be lower income industries. So then we sort of see this gap where we're seeing females in lower paying jobs. Two people can go their whole lives in very different jobs and be in completely different financial positions. If you think about a husband that's a surgeon and a wife that's an admin assistant, the surgeon is going to be earning a lot more, and the admin assistant female wife is not going to be earning as much over her time. And if they get divorced, she's going to be in a different disadvantaged position. Now, that admin assistant might have amazing skills to become a software engineer, but because of the barriers to entry, she might not know that there's even a career out there for her in that and might never make that change. It's sort of like signaled to us that we are there to become teachers, nurses, jobs out there, and they just so happen to be lower paying. So it sort of keeps, on a systemic level, keeps the female population suppressed. So obviously, the ways that we deal with those issues look really, really different to the way that we deal with gender pay gaps on an individual level in organizations. If you have two people that are earning in an organization that are earning different amounts based on their gender, just because there's no salary transparency and you can take advantage of the fact that you can pay a female less, that's its own problem. But on a systemic level, we have surgeons and construction workers getting paid really, really amazing amounts of money, and they tend to be male dominated industries. So how do we get more women in those industries and open up those doors and remove those barriers to entries for them? So that two completely different dynamics, but very important to be aware of both.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's why that's why your work with Her Tech Circle is super important, right? Because it helps get the
Exactly.
message out there and
100%.
shows what other options there are out there.
It's also
Yeah.
important for your podcast, the fact that you guys have accessible information out there that anybody can get online and find. They might come across your podcast, listen to a couple of episodes and go, oh, this IWD series they've done is really great. And it kind of gives them an introduction into this space and they might want to pursue a career in it. Initiatives within organizations like that we're seeing pop up. Coles has a relauncher program, REA have a Springboard to Tech program. And these are programs specifically designed to allow women into the industry. So maybe women who have a gap in their career because they have had maternity leave, or they're juniors who are struggling to break in. They can apply for these programs and get a bit of extra training and get a bit of extra hands-on help and then be placed into their workforces a lot easier. That's also a really fantastic way to engage with female engineers or people who want to move into this space that might be untapped skills, untapped potential, or hidden talent, as we like to call it. Having these amazing initiatives as part of your recruitment process is a really, really cool way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen nurses move into tech. I've seen teachers
Definitely.
move into tech. It absolutely happens.
Absolutely. And they usually have incredible life experience that make them really different, that will allow them to add a lot of extra value to their organization and to their teams because of the difference in their background. Like a nurse would have like incredible EQ, incredible empathy that make them really fantastic at stakeholder management. That's something you will really struggle to teach, but you can teach them how to code really easily. So if they can code and they're motivated, they'll be a fantastic engineer over time with really high EQ, which can be really hard to find sometimes. So this is
Mm.
where the importance of diverse hiring comes in, is that you tap into skill sets and different skill sets that will be really important that you won't be able to find if you just keep on hiring the same type of person over and over again.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Great discussion.
Yeah.
What's your top tip for an action every hiring manager could take,
I love that.
tomorrow
Yeah, I love
Mm.
this
to
question
make
too.
recruit?
The main thing is just bring it back to basics, bring it back to people, bring it back to the why. I think that we're all very caught up in it's information overload at the moment, especially with AI. Things are changing so quickly. If you don't know where to start, and this conversation maybe has made you feel inspired and motivated, but overwhelmed at the same time, you don't have to address everything all at once. Just grab a female colleague, start off with a coffee. Grab a female colleague, take her out for a coffee, ask her what she wants to see more of, ask her what her biggest challenges are, what she perceives to be the biggest challenges in her career, and then start reverse engineering it. You guys are engineers, you've got that mentality, you've got that problem solving mentality. If you start, it's the same deal as like, treat it like it's a problem statement for a product. What's the gap? What's the
Mm,
problem here? How do we then fix it? If you start with the why, that's a fantastic place to start because then you can start having conversations around, okay, now, well, where's the what? How do we address this? So start having those conversations with your female colleagues, get to know what the struggle is, and then you'll be coming from an amazing place of empathy. And you might find that things start to change organically, as well as with alongside you taking action in your organization.
yeah, great tip.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Great tip.
having me. I thought that was a really
No
worthwhile
worries.
conversation.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on,
Thank you
getting up
so much
early.
for joining.
It was
Yeah.
awesome.
My pleasure, guys.
So thank you, listeners, for listening. We've got part 3 coming up next week, next episode as
Yay.
well. And that'll be also awesome conversation. Until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe. Send us any feedback and we'll see you next time. Thanks all. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Georgia.
Pleasure. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.